My name is Margaret Hale, and for the past 25 years, I've poured every ounce of myself into a small lakeside resort tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's not fancy by city standards, 20 rooms, a lavender garden that explodes into color every June, and a dock where you can watch the sun melt into the water at dusk. But to me, it's more than a business. It's the life my late husband and I built together, brick by brick, dream by dream. Most mornings, I wake up to the sound of loons calling across the lake and the smell of fresh bread rising in the kitchen. But on the morning this story begins, the air felt different, thicker somehow, like a storm was rolling in. I didn't know yet that by the end of the week, I'd be fighting not just for the resort, but for my dignity, my family, and the very legacy I'd promised my husband I would protect. The first crack in the piece came with a phone call from my younger son, Ethan. These days, his voice always carried a note of urgency, like every conversation was a sales pitch I hadn't asked for. "Mom," he said brightly, "remember the business idea Vanessa and I told you about?" My stomach tightened. We'd been dancing around this topic for months. Ethan wanted me to sell the resort, or at least partner with him and his wife, so they could fund some flashy venture called Stayscape, a tech-enabled travel experience app. According to him, my resort was underutilized and could be transformed into a high-end destination brand. According to me, it was fine just the way it was, but Ethan had never been good at taking no for an answer. I reminded him, as gently as I could, that the resort wasn't for sale. That's when Vanessa's voice chimed in from somewhere beside him. I could hear the smile in her tone, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Margaret, we're just trying to help you maximize your potential. You could retire comfortably. Let us handle the work." She made retire sound like BV put out to pasture. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I was on the verge of signing a lucrative contract with an international travel company that would keep the resort booked solid for years. The deal was delicate, though, any sign of ownership change, and it would be off the table. Selling wasn't just out of the question, it was impossible without losing everything I'd worked for. Still, Ethan pushed. "You're sitting on prime property, Mom. 20 rooms in a tourist hotspot. You could cash out for millions." I'd heard it all before, but what I hadn't heard yet was the part that made my blood run cold. Vanessa added softly, "We've already had it appraised." Already had it appraised. Without telling me, without my consent. That's when I realized they weren't just asking anymore. They were moving pieces behind my back. That night I stood on the dock, watching the moon ripple across the lake, and I thought about my older son, Caleb. He was halfway across the world in Switzerland, working as an attorney. He'd never once asked me for a dime. He'd never once implied that what I had wasn't enough. But Ethan had a knack for turning my love into leverage. I promised myself I'd stand firm. But I didn't yet know that Vanessa had already set a bigger trap. She wasn't just after the resort for Ethan's dream app. She'd quietly reached out to a developer who wanted to tear the place down and build luxury condos. The deal was worth double what she was telling Ethan, and she'd pocket the difference without him ever knowing. The next day, she invited me to a friendly coffee at an upscale cafe in town. I went, thinking I'd finally put the matter to rest. Instead, I walked into an ambush dressed in designer cream and perfect lipstick. Vanessa laid out a vision that erased everything I loved about my home, turning the gardens into a parking lot, replacing the dining hall with a rooftop bar, even converting my husband's handcrafted dock into a marina experience. When I refused, her smile didn't falter, but her voice lost its sugar. "Margaret, you're not getting any younger. Think about what's best for the future." She might as well have said, "Step aside and let us take over." I left that cafe shaking not from fear, but from something colder, determination, because I'd survived losing my husband, raising 2 boys alone, and building a business from scratch. I wasn't about to lose it to greed disguised as ambition. What I didn't realize then was that this was only the opening move. The real confrontation was still coming, one that would test every boundary of family, loyalty, and love. And when the final play unfolded, it wouldn't just expose Ethan's motives, it would reveal Vanessa's betrayal in a way none of us could ever take back. The morning after my coffee with Vanessa, the lake was shrouded in mist so thick it looked like the world had been erased. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, listening to the drip of dew from the roof. Normally, this was my favorite time of day, quiet, untouched, like the resort belonged only to me. But all I could hear was Vanessa's voice echoing in my head, "You're not getting any younger." Inside, the phone rang. I didn't have to check the caller ID to know who it was. Ethan had a rhythm to his persistence, never enough time to let me breathe, just enough to keep me on the defensive. "Morning, Mom," he said, too casually. "So, Vanessa told me you're still not convinced." I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Not convinced, not interested. The resort stays as it is. There was a pause, the kind that told me he was restraining himself. "I think you're making a mistake. I've got numbers I want to show you, projections, revenue models, everything. Just give me 30 minutes to walk you through it." "Ethan," I said evenly, "you've had 30 minutes. You've had months of 30 minutes." Another pause, this one sharper. Then, as if it were a casual aside, he added, "Vanessa and I met with a potential partner yesterday, someone who really believes in the vision." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "A partner for a property you don't own." He gave a short laugh, the kind that's supposed to sound harmless but is anything but. "We're just exploring options. Nothing's set in stone." But something was set in stone. I could hear it in his voice, the quiet thrill of a man who thinks he's one step ahead. And it didn't take much imagination to figure out who that partner might be. I'd seen the developers' ads in the local paper, glossy renderings of luxury condos overlooking the lake, all glass and steel. They'd been circling properties like vultures for months. "Ethan," I said, "are you talking to the Brindle Group?" Silence. Then, too quickly, "Of course not." The Brindle Group was the kind of company that bulldozed history and sold the rubble for profit. If they touched my resort, there wouldn't be a single lavender bush left standing. "I don't know what Vanessa's told you," I said, "but if you think I'm selling to them, you're dreaming." "Mom," he said, his tone tightening, "you can't just shut down every opportunity because it doesn't fit your nostalgia. Times change. You either adapt or get left behind." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "And you think adapting means handing over everything your father and I built to strangers?" His sigh was long, deliberate, meant to sound disappointed, "to people who know how to make it better." Better. I bit back the 100 things I wanted to say. That the resort was already profitable. That the lavender harvest alone brought in enough to cover the winter months. That every room was booked solid from May through September. That my definition of better didn't involve replacing handmade quilts with chrome fixtures and LED mood lighting. But I knew none of it would matter. Ethan had decided the resort was his ticket to whatever dream he was chasing this time, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it, or until I made it impossible for him to try. After we hung up, I walked through the lobby, letting my fingers trail over the polished wood banister, the framed photographs of guests who'd been coming here for decades, the handmade furniture Dean and I had built in our garage the first winter we opened. Everything here had a story, and none of those stories involved a rooftop infinity pool or branded experience suites. By mid-afternoon, the mist had burned off, and the sun lit the lake like molten silver. That's when I saw Vanessa's car pull into the gravel lot. She stepped out wearing sunglasses big enough to cover half her face, her hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. "Margaret," she called, her smile fixed in place. "Do you have a minute?" I didn't, but I wasn't about to let her think I was hiding. I met her halfway, stopping just short of the front steps. "I wanted to smooth things over," she said, her voice sugary. "I think maybe I came on too strong yesterday. Ethan and we really believe this could be something amazing for all of us. All of us, I repeated. Yes, imagine the resort updated with modern amenities, a bigger marketing reach, maybe even a spa. We'd draw in a whole new clientele. And the Brindle Group fits into this how her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her mouth tightened. I don't know where you're getting that idea. From experience, I said flatly. She hesitated, then took a step closer. Margaret, you've got to trust me. We're family. Family. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. Caleb was family. Dean had been family. Ethan, well, blood didn't always guarantee loyalty. I trust people who've earned it, I said. For the first time, her smile slipped. I'd hate for you to miss this chance. Offers like this don't last forever. There it was, the threat dressed as concern. I'd heard it from bankers, realtors, even pushy guests who thought they could bully their way into buying the place. But I'd never expected to hear it from someone who called me mom at Christmas dinner. I'm not missing anything, I told her. You and Ethan are. She didn't answer, just adjusted her sunglasses and walked back to her car. But as she pulled away, I caught sight of a folder on the passenger seat, thick with papers. The corner of a Brindle Group logo peeked out like a warning flag. That night, I sat at my desk with a pen and notepad, writing down every detail of our conversations, dates, times, what was said. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Because if they were willing to go this far, I had to be ready for whatever came next. And I had a feeling next was coming sooner than I thought. The call came the following morning, not from Ethan, not from Vanessa, from a man who introduced himself as Daniel Hurst, acquisitions manager for the Brindle Group. Mrs. Hale, he said smoothly, I understand you're considering a sale. I'd love to set up a meeting to discuss terms. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I'm not considering anything. He chuckled softly. Well, that's not what I've been told. When I hung up, my hands were shaking not from fear this time, but from something else entirely. Rage. They weren't just circling anymore. They were moving in for the kill. And if they thought I was going to roll over quietly, they didn't know me at all. By the time the sun went down that evening, I had replayed my conversation with the Brindle Group's acquisitions man 100 times in my head. Every smooth word, every implied certainty that I was considering a sale, only sharpened my resolve. They were acting as if it was already a done deal. And if they believed that, it meant Ethan and Vanessa had been telling them exactly what they wanted to hear. I closed up the front deed desk for the night, switched off the lobby lights, and wandered into the kitchen. The resort was quiet now, just the hum of the fridge and the distant lapping of water against the dock. This was my time to think. The lavender harvest was drying in the back shed. The rooms were full of returning guests who knew me by name. Everything here was alive and thriving, yet my own son was plotting its funeral. That was the moment I realized I needed an ally, someone who didn't see the resort as a bank account waiting to be cracked open. And there was only one person who fit that description. I picked up the phone and dialed an international number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Mom Caleb sounded surprised and immediately concerned. Is everything okay? I closed my eyes for a second, letting the sound of his voice wash over me. I'm not sure. I admitted, something's going on here, and I need to tell you about it. Over the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out, the endless phone calls from Ethan, the meeting with Vanessa at the cafe, the folder with the Brindle Group logo, and the call from their acquisitions manager that morning. I didn't try to soften it. Caleb had always valued the truth, even when it hurt. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. I could picture him at his desk in Zurich, leaning back in his chair, eyes narrowed in thought. Mom, he said finally, this isn't just pushy salesmanship. This is a coordinated move. They're creating a paper trail to make it look like you've agreed to sell. That way, when you refuse, they can claim you backed out of a verbal agreement or worse, say you misrepresented your intentions. A knot tightened in my stomach. Can they do that? If you're not careful, yes, but not if I'm involved. His tone shifted, becoming all business. Don't sign anything. Don't even respond to their emails or texts unless it's to say, I'll have my attorney review this. My attorney? Yes, he said firmly, me. I almost laughed, partly from relief, partly from the absurdity of it. Caleb, you're halfway across the world. Not for long. I can be on a flight tomorrow night. I'll take a week off work, come home, and we'll handle this together. I wanted to protest, to tell him it was too much trouble, that I could manage, but the truth was, I'd been feeling the weight of this fight pressing down on me for weeks, and hearing him say we instead of you. It was the first time I'd felt like I wasn't standing alone. All right, I said softly, come home. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the empty resort around me, suddenly feeling less like a fortress and more like a staging ground. Caleb was coming. That meant I had to be ready for whatever Vanessa and Ethan were planning next, because they wouldn't just stop and wait politely for him to arrive. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even poured my coffee. A text from Vanessa. We need to talk. Urgent. Lunch tomorrow. 2 heart emojis. I stared at the screen, wondering if she thought those little symbols could erase the fact that she was trying to gut my life's work. I typed back one word, sure. It wasn't agreement, it was bait. Because now that Caleb was on his way, I wanted them to keep thinking I was open to discussion. The more they showed their hand, the easier it would be to dismantle whatever game they were playing. That afternoon, I walked the property, taking mental inventory. The lavender fields were just starting to fade into autumn gold. The lake was low, revealing the old wooden post, bambutektan, from the first dock Dean had built with his own hands. Guests lounged in Adirondack chairs, sipping lemonade and reading. This place had survived storms, power outages, even a fire in the laundry room 10 years ago. It wasn't going to fall to paperwork and smooth talk. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A silver SUV had been parked just beyond the property line for over an hour. I'd seen it once before, 2 days after Ethan's first pitch about selling. The windows were tinted, but every so often, a flicker of movement inside caught my eye. I made a note to tell Caleb about it. That night, I pulled out the old leather guest ledger we'd used before we switched to digital booking. It wasn't just names and dates, it was a history of people who'd made this resort part of their lives. Anniversaries, family reunions, solo retreats. Each line was proof that this place mattered. Proof that no high-end brand experience could replace the warmth of a handwritten welcome note left on a nightstand. And maybe, just maybe, it was also proof that if this ever came down to a public fight, the town would take my side. The following day, I drove into town to meet Vanessa for lunch at the Lakeshore Bistro. She was already there, seated at a corner table, with a view of the water. Her smile was polished as ever, but I noticed her nails tapping lightly on the table, a tell she probably didn't know she had. Margaret, she said, rising to greet me. You look wonderful. I didn't bother with pleasantries. What's urgent? She hesitated, then leaned in. The Brindle Group is very interested. They're willing to offer more than market value. This could set you up for life. I felt my jaw tighten. I'm already set up for life. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. This isn't just about you. Think about Ethan. About the opportunities this could create for him. There it was, the shift from persuasion to pressure. Vanessa, I said quietly, I've been thinking about Ethan. I've been thinking about the kind of man I raised. And I have to tell you, I don't recognize him anymore. Her smile faltered. That's not fair. Neither is going behind my back to talk to developers. For a moment, the mask slipped. She didn't deny it. She just sat back and crossed her arms. "You're making a mistake." I finished my coffee, stood, and placed a 20 on the table. "We'll see." On the drive back, my phone buzzed again. A message from Caleb: "Flight booked. See you Thursday. Don't meet them again without me there." I smiled for the first time in days. Because whatever they thought they were building, they were about to discover that this wasn't just my fight anymore, it was ours. The morning Caleb was due to arrive. The air was sharp and clear, the kind of mountain morning that made every leaf look outlined in gold. I woke earlier than usual, restless, pacing from the kitchen to the dock and back again. It had been years since Caleb had come home for more than a quick holiday visit, and this time, he wasn't coming for leisure. He was coming for battle. By mid-afternoon, I spotted his rental car turning onto the gravel drive, sunlight glinting off the windshield. I stood on the porch as he parked, my heart thudding like it used to when he'd step off the school bus as a boy. He got out wearing a navy suit that looked like it belonged in a Zurich boardroom. But when he saw me, the polished formality melted into a smile. "Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug that made the years between us disappear. He still smelled faintly of cedar soap, the same kind I used to buy for him when he was in college. "You look successful," I teased, stepping back to take him in. "And you look like someone who's about to win a fight," he replied, eyes scanning the property as though cataloging every detail. Inside, over coffee at the kitchen table, I walked him through everything again, every call, every meeting, every odd interaction with Vanessa. I told him about the Brindle Group logo peeking out of her folder, about the silver SUV I'd seen parked near the property line. Caleb listened without interrupting, jotting notes in a slim leather-bound book. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "They're setting up a narrative," he said, "making it seem like you're already on board, so they can pressure you to sign at the last moment. The SUV is likely someone from Brindle keeping tabs, making sure you don't bring in outside counsel before they're ready to strike." "Too late for that," I said with a small smile. He returned it, exactly. After unpacking in his old room, Caleb insisted on walking the property. We went from the lavender fields to the dock, through the guest cottages, and down the wooded trail to the overlook. He asked questions not just about the business, but about the people who stayed here, the bookings, the maintenance costs. He was building his case, I could tell. That evening, as we were locking up for the night, a pair of headlights swept across the drive. A black sedan slowed as it passed, then turned around and came back the other way. Caleb's hand tightened on my arm. "That's them," he murmured. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've dealt with their type before. They want you to know they're watching, but not enough for you to call the police. It's intimidation by presence." We stood in silence until the car finally disappeared down the road. Caleb exhaled slowly. "They'll make their move soon. The key is to let them think they still have the upper hand until we take it away." The next morning, Ethan called. His voice was uncharacteristically light, almost smug. "Hey, Mom, Vanessa and I want to come by tomorrow. We've made some changes to our proposal stuff I think you'll like." "Tomorrow?" I asked, glancing at Caleb across the table. "Yeah, noon. We'll bring lunch, just a family talk." I didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "All right." When I hung up, Caleb was already writing something down. "They're bringing documents," he said, "probably more than last time. This is the meeting they've been building toward." That afternoon, Caleb made a call of his own. Pacing the porch with the phone pressed to his ear, I didn't catch every word, but I heard phrases: title search, lien history, preliminary contract filings. He was digging into the legal underbelly of whatever Vanessa had set in motion. Later, over dinner, he laid out what he'd found. "They've already submitted a letter of intent to Brindle, with your property listed as the asset. They claim you're a willing seller pending final terms. It's unsigned, Of course, but it's dated last week. I felt my pulse spike. How is that even legal? It's not, if we can prove you never authorized it. Which is why tomorrow, we're going to let them talk and we're going to record every word. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house sounded amplified, every gust of wind against the shutters like a warning. But knowing Caleb was just down the hall steadied me. I wasn't walking into this alone anymore. Morning came bright and cold, the kind of crispness that made you feel sharper just breathing it in. Caleb wore another perfectly tailored suit, this time charcoal gray, with a silver tie that caught the light when he moved. Armor, he called it. We set the table in the front parlor instead of the kitchen, a deliberate choice. The kitchen was personal, intimate. The parlor, with its heavy oak table and straight-back chairs, felt formal, less like a family home, more like neutral ground. At 11:58, we saw their black BMW pull into the drive. Behind it came the same silver SUV I'd noticed before. Vanessa got out first, in a cream blazer and heels that sank slightly into the gravel. Ethan followed, looking more nervous than I'd expected. From the SUV, a man in a suit and a woman with a leather portfolio stepped out. They brought their attorney and a bank rep, Caleb murmured, not surprised in the least. Perfect. When they stepped inside, Vanessa beamed. Margaret, thank you for having us. We're really excited to show you what we've come up with. I gestured toward the table. Please, sit. Caleb didn't join us right away. He came in a moment later, portfolio in hand, and took the seat beside me. I don't believe we've met. He said smoothly to the newcomers, I'm Caleb Hale, Margaret's legal counsel. Vanessa blinked, clearly caught off guard. Legal counsel. Yes, he said, sliding a business card across the table. I'm an attorney specializing in property and contract law. Mom thought it would be prudent to have me review anything before she makes a decision. The bank rep shifted uncomfortably. The attorney cleared his throat. Of course, we're happy to have everyone on the same page. Good, Caleb said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made everyone sit a little straighter. Why don't you start by walking us through exactly what you've brought today? Vanessa opened her folder, but her movements were slower now, less confident. Ethan kept glancing at her as if silently urging her to stick to whatever script they'd prepared. As they began talking about opportunity zones, maximized returns, and strategic partnerships, Caleb took meticulous notes, occasionally interrupting with precise legal questions that made their attorney stumble. The bank rep stayed silent, her gaze darting between us like she was reassessing the entire situation. And that's when I knew tomorrow's chapter in this fight wouldn't belong to them. It would belong to us. Vanessa cleared her throat, flipping to the first page of a glossy packet. We've restructured the plan to make sure you keep the front half of the property your home. The lavender fields, the dock, all the development would happen on the back acreage. That way, you still have your space, but we create something bigger, more profitable. Profitable, for who? Caleb asked without looking up from his notes. For all of us, she said, the brightness in her tone feeling like it was painted on. You'd have a share in the business, passive income, no headaches. The Brindle Group. She stopped herself too late. Caleb's pen froze mid-word. The Brindle Group. Vanessa blinked, then glanced at Ethan. He shifted in his seat. They're just one of several potential partners we've talked to. Caleb set his pen down slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Interesting, because in the letter of intent I reviewed yesterday, they're listed as the exclusive development partner, which means they're not just potential, they're integral. The attorney's eyes flicked toward Vanessa, a silent warning. She pasted on a smile. That must be some old draft. We've made changes since then. Caleb leaned back, crossing one ankle over his knee. Then I'm sure you won't mind sending me the current version of that agreement for review. I'd like to confirm whether my mother's property is still listed as the primary asset. Vanessa hesitated. We can get that to you. Get, Caleb said. And while we're at it, I'd like to discuss the financial risk allocation. In the draft I saw, if the project fails, my mother alone is responsible for covering the bank's construction loan. Your clients, he nodded toward Ethan and Vanessa, would lose nothing but their time. The bank representative shifted in her seat. That's standard for collateral-backed financing. It's also standard, Caleb replied evenly, to secure the borrower's explicit consent before listing their property as collateral, which my mother has not given, ever. The room went still. Ethan's jaw tightened. Caleb, we're trying to make this work for everyone. You're turning it into a fight. It became a fight, Caleb said, the moment you started talking to developers without Mom's permission. Vanessa jumped back in, voice higher now. We're family. We wouldn't do anything to hurt her. I could almost laugh at the audacity, but Caleb's expression didn't change. Then you won't mind explaining why. In the Brindle Group's investor prospectus, the projected profit margin includes demolishing the guest cottages and replacing them with condo units. Units they plan to pre-sell before construction even starts. Vanessa's face went pale. That's not. It's public record. Caleb cut in, filed with the county last month. So unless there's another Margaret Hale resort property on the lake, I think we all know exactly what's going on here. The attorney's polished composure was slipping fast. He started gathering his papers. Perhaps we should take a step back and… No, Caleb said. His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that stops people mid-sentence. We're going to finish this conversation right now, because my mother deserves to know every angle before she makes any decision. Ethan's eyes darted to mine, almost pleading. Mom, it's not what it sounds like. Vanessa just got ahead of herself. We weren't going to do anything without telling you. Bikishe. I held his gaze. You've already done plenty without telling me. The bank rep closed her folder, clearly ready to be anywhere but here. Mrs. Hale, given the concerns raised, we'll need to pause any financing discussions until these issues are resolved. Resolved, Caleb repeated, meaning completely withdrawn. Vanessa's voice sharpened. You can't just kill the deal like that. Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. Watch me. She turned back to me, the mask cracking enough for me to see the steel underneath. Margaret, this is the kind of opportunity that only comes once. You can't run this place forever. What happens when you can't keep up with it? I didn't even have to think about my answer. Then I'll let it go on my terms, not yours, and certainly not Brindle's. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Ethan looked down at the table, jaw clenched. Vanessa sat rigid, like she'd swallowed her own fury. The attorney and bank rep exchanged a glance that told me they both wanted this meeting over. I stood, the chair scraping against the hardwood. I think we're done here. Caleb rose with me, sliding his nose into his portfolio. We'll be in touch if we need anything further from you, he told them, his tone pure dismissal. They filed out in silence, the bank rep first, then the attorney. Vanessa lingered at the doorway, her eyes locked on mine. There was no smile now, no pretense. You're making a mistake, she said softly. I stepped closer, close enough that she could see I wasn't flinching. Maybe, but it'll be my mistake to make. She left without another word. Ethan was the last to go, his shoulders slumped. Mom, he started, but I shook my head. Goodbye, Ethan. When the door closed behind them, the house was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Caleb turned to me, his expression softening. You did good. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly heavy. We both did. Caleb poured us each a glass of water, sliding mine across the table. This isn't over yet. They'll try another angle, but we've got the upper hand now. I took a long sip, the cold grounding me. I'm not afraid of them anymore. You shouldn't be, he said. You've been underestimated for far too long. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tight band around my chest loosen. I still didn't know exactly how this fight would end, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever came next, they weren't going to see it coming. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The day after the meeting, the resort felt strangely still. The guests went about their mornings kayaking on the lake, lingering over breakfast in the dining room, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something had shifted, not in the property, but in the air between me, Ethan, and Vanessa. It wasn't just that they'd failed to get my signature, it was that they'd been exposed. Caleb had cracked open their plan in front of their own allies, and there was no way to spin that as anything but a loss. Still, I knew Vanessa well enough to know she wouldn't retreat quietly. She'd regroup, reframe, and come at me from another angle. And sure enough, by mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text. "Margaret, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Let's meet privately. No lawyers, no tension, just us." I stared at it, imagining the silky tone she would have used if she'd said it aloud. The no lawyers part told me everything I needed to know. She wanted me isolated, without Caleb's shield. I didn't respond. Instead, I slid my phone across the table to Caleb. He read it, then smirked. "She's panicking. That's good. She's also dangerous when she's cornered," I reminded him. "That's why we don't let her choose the battleground," he said, already pulling out his laptop. "If she wants to play behind closed doors, fine. We'll open the doors for her." "What are you doing?" "Drafting a notice of cease and desist," he replied. "We're going to send it to her, Ethan, and most importantly, the Brindle Group. It'll state clearly that you are not, and have never been, a willing seller. Any continued representation that you are will be considered misrepresentation and subject to legal action." I blinked at him. "That'll make them furious." "Exactly," Caleb said with a grin. "And it'll make Brindle nervous. They don't like messy deals, too much liability risk." While he typed, I made lunch something simple, just soup and bread, but my hands kept pausing over the cutting board, my mind playing out the ways Vanessa might react. I knew pride was her soft spot. If Caleb's letter embarrassed her in front of Brindle, she might come unglued. By the time we finished eating, the letter was done. Caleb printed 3 copies and had me sign each one in bold, deliberate strokes. Then he scanned them and sent the digital versions out before sealing the originals in envelopes. "They'll get these tomorrow morning," he said, "and when they do, they'll know the game has changed." He was right. The next morning, the reaction was almost immediate. At 8:13 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the moment I answered, a deep, polished voice filled the line. "Mrs. Hale, this is Robert Lewis, Executive Director with the Brindle Group. I just wanted to say we received your letter. I'd like to clarify our interest in your property has always been contingent on your enthusiasm for the project." "Then there's nothing to discuss," I said simply. "Understood," he replied, but there was an edge to his voice. "We'll make note of your position. I can't speak for your son and his wife, of course, but from our perspective, the matter is closed." I hung up feeling lighter, almost buoyant. It wasn't over, but it was the first time since this all began that Brindle had been the one retreating. Vanessa, however, was another story. At 9:02, she texted me. "What the hell did you send to Brindle? You've embarrassed us. This was a business opportunity, and you've ruined it." I didn't answer. At 9:07, Ethan called. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:15, he called again. This time I picked up. "Mom, Vanessa's upset," he started, his voice tight. "You blindsided us." I protected myself. I said, "You didn't need to drag Brindle into it. They were already in it. Ethan, you put them there." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted from defensive to something almost pleading. I wanted to build something. I thought this could be it." I softened slightly. He was still my son, no matter how deep this wedge had been driven. Then build it, Ethan, but not on the bones of what I've already built. He didn't answer, and after a long silence, I ended the call. Caleb came in from the porch just as I hung up. How'd he take it? Like someone who just realized the bank isn't handing him the keys anymore. Caleb's expression turned thoughtful. Good, that means we move to the next phase. What's that? We dig into Vanessa's personal dealings with Brindle. If she's been making side agreements, and I think she has, there'll be a trail. That afternoon, he made a few calls I wasn't privy to, speaking in the clipped, precise language he used in court. By evening, he had what he was looking for, a copy of a preliminary agreement between Vanessa and a Brindle acquisitions officer signed, not by Ethan, but by Vanessa alone. It was dated 2 weeks before she and Ethan ever pitched the idea to me. The terms were brutal. Brindle would pay her a consulting fee equal to 10% of the property's sale price, plus a bonus if demolition permits were approved within the first year. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Ethan doesn't know. Not a clue. Caleb confirmed. She's been playing both sides, using him to get to you, and using Brindle to get to her payday. The discovery hit me like a cold wave. Suddenly, Ethan's stubbornness made more sense. Vanessa had been feeding his ambition while steering the deal toward her own profit. What do we do with this? I asked. We wait, Caleb said. Let her think she still has some cards left. Then, when she tries to play them, we lay this on the table, in front of Ethan. The thought of that confrontation made my stomach knot, but also uncoil, because for the first time, I saw a way this might not just end in my victory, it might open Ethan's eyes too. That night, as I stood on the dock watching the moon rise over the lake, I thought about all the fights I'd had in my life, the quiet ones, against bills and storms and broken boilers, the loud ones, against developers and petty local politics. But this fight was different. It was personal on every level: family, home, survival. And with Caleb at my side, I no longer doubted who would win. 2 days passed without a word from Vanessa. No texts, no calls, no surprise visits. For a woman who thrived on control, the silence was telling. She wasn't retreating, she was recalculating. Caleb thought so too. She's waiting for the right moment to make her last move, he said over breakfast. And when she does, it'll be big. She needs to force you into a corner before Brindle walks away completely. I had just poured my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. The message was short. We need to meet, all 3 of us, today. It wasn't a request. Caleb read it over my shoulder. Perfect, he said. Invite them here. Keep it on your turf. At exactly 2 o'clock, the familiar black BMW rolled into the gravel lot. This time, it was just Ethan and Vanessa, no lawyer, no bank rep. That alone told me she was changing tactics. They came up the steps together. Ethan looked tired, the skin under his eyes shadowed, his mouth set in a line that didn't match his usual charm. Vanessa, on the other hand, was immaculate navy dress, hair smooth to a shine, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Margaret, she said, breezing past me into the parlor without waiting to be invited. Let's not waste time. I followed, Caleb at my side. Vanessa set the portfolio on the table and opened it with a flourish. We've secured a final offer from Brindle, higher than before. This is as good as it gets. Ethan cleared his throat. They're willing to close fast. No long escrow, no delays. It would give you us enough to do whatever we want for the rest of our lives. I stayed silent, letting them talk. Vanessa slid a single document toward me. This is a memorandum of understanding. It's not a full contract, just a statement of intent. Once you sign, they'll release the funds for an immediate transfer. Caleb leaned forward, his eyes on the paper. And how much of that immediate transfer goes to my mother directly? Vanessa hesitated, then said, 80%. The rest is split between consulting fees and administrative costs. Caleb's tone was cool. Consulting fees for who? Her smile didn't falter. Industry professionals who made the deal possible. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. By industry professionals, you mean yourself? Ethan looked at her sharply. What? She laughed lightly, like it was nothing. I've put months into securing this. My time and expertise are worth something. Caleb reached into his portfolio and pulled out a document of his own, worth 10% of the total sale price, plus a demolition bonus. According to this preliminary agreement, you signed with Brindle 2 weeks before you even pitched the idea to my mother. The air in the room seemed to change. Ethan's head snapped toward her. You did what? Vanessa's eyes narrowed at Caleb. Where did you get that? It's public record once it's filed with the county. Caleb said, you really should know that, given your MBA. Ethan's face flushed. You've been cutting me out this whole time. I was protecting you, she shot back. If the deal went south, you wouldn't be liable. No, E interrupted, his voice rising. You were protecting your payday. I watched the crack between them widen in real time. Vanessa turned back to me, her voice sharp now. Margaret, you can still make this work. Sign the memorandum, and you'll be secure for life. Caleb slid the paper back toward her without even glancing at it. She's already secure. What she's not is stupid. Ethan sank into his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. I can't believe this. Vanessa's composure was unraveling fast. Don't do this, Ethan. This is our future. He looked at her, and for the first time since this all began, there was no softness in his expression. No, Vanessa, this was your future. You just tried to sell my family out to get it. Her eyes flashed, but she knew the battle was lost. She gathered her portfolio, stood, and looked at me. You'll regret this. I met her gaze. The only thing I regret is ever letting you through my front door. She left without another word, heels clicking sharply on the porch steps. The BMW roared to life, gravel spitting under the tires as it sped away. Ethan didn't move for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I thought I was in control. I thought this was my idea. I didn't realize He trailed off, shaking his head. I could have said you should have known. I could have reminded him of the warnings he ignored. But I didn't. Instead, I said, now you do. He looked up at me then, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, something that looked a little like shame. I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Caleb closed his portfolio with a quiet snap. Brindle's out, Vanessa's out. If they try anything else, we have the legal groundwork to shut it down immediately. I felt the weight slide off my shoulders in a way I hadn't dared hope for. The fight wasn't just mine anymore, and for the first time in weeks, I could imagine walking through the lavender fields without that knot in my chest. Ethan stood, hesitated, then said, I need to get my things from her place. I'll be in touch. I didn't know what that meant for us in the long term, but as the BMW disappeared down the road for the last time, I knew one thing: the resort was safe. Caleb put a hand on my shoulder. You held your ground. He said, Dad would be proud. I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside me. So am I. The morning after Vanessa drove away, the resort felt different. The air was still cool. The lavender fields still bathed in that soft golden light. But the heaviness that had been sitting on my chest for weeks had lifted. For the first time in a long while, I could walk the grounds without wondering who was plotting to take them from me. Guests waved from the porch of the main lodge, mugs of coffee in hand, their faces relaxed and happy. The sound of oars dipping into the lake drifted up from the dock. Caleb was already on the porch, coffee in one hand, a stack of documents in the other. He looked entirely at ease, but I knew him well enough to recognize the way his eyes tracked every movement on the property. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was protecting. Morning, he said, handing me a mug. I've been thinking about next steps. Next steps, I repeated, smiling despite myself. Keeping you bulletproof, he said simply. We can set up a trust so the property can't be sold or leveraged without your direct consent. No one, not Ethan, not anyone will be able to touch it without your approval. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. Do it. He nodded, like he'd already expected that answer. Around mid-morning, Ethan's pickup pulled into the gravel lot. For a moment, I braced myself for another confrontation, but when he stepped out, he didn't have that slick, eager energy anymore. His movements were slower, his shoulders a little hunched. "Hey," he said, almost tentative. I glanced toward Caleb, but he gave me a small nod and headed inside, leaving the two of us on the porch. Ethan took the steps up to where I stood. I wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. I thought I was building something for both of us. I didn't see what Vanessa was doing until yesterday. I studied his face. There was no sales pitch in his tone now. No push. Just exhaustion and maybe something like regret. You didn't want to see, I said gently. That's different. He winced, but didn't argue. I know. I've been thinking about Dad, about how he worked for everything he had, and how you've done the same. I should have respected that. It wasn't absolution, but it was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in months. You can still change, I told him, but that's on you, Ethan, not me. He nodded. I'm going to. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I need to figure it out without using you as my safety net. That, more than any apology, eased something inside me. We stood there for a while, watching the lake shimmer in the morning light. Eventually, Ethan said, I'll be staying with a friend in town for a bit. I'll keep my distance. All right, I said, but you know where I am. When he drove away, the dust from his tires hung in the air like a curtain slowly settling. I didn't know what kind of sun would eventually walk back through my door, but for now, it was enough that he'd walked out without taking my home with him. That afternoon, Caleb and I went into town to meet with a local attorney he trusted. It felt different walking into that office now, less like a defensive maneuver, more like laying down permanent fortifications. We discussed the trust, title protections, and a few additional clauses Caleb insisted on adding. By the time we left, the resort's future was locked tighter than the vault at the county bank. On the drive back, we passed the cafe where I'd first met Vanessa weeks ago. The sight of it made me think about how close I'd come to letting her wear me down. I turned to Caleb. You know, if you hadn't come home when you did. He shook his head. You still would have fought. I just made sure you had better weapons. I smiled at that, but my mind lingered on the truth of it. He had been my weapon and my shield. That evening, the sky turned the color of honey as the sun slid behind the ridge. Guests gathered on the lawn for the weekly bonfire, and I found myself joining them. Someone passed me a marshmallow stick, and I roasted it until it was golden and soft, the way Dean had always liked. Caleb sat beside me, the firelight dancing on his face. Feels good, doesn't it? He said. What does? Being back in control. I nodded. It feels better than I thought it would. But it's not just control. It's knowing I didn't let them turn this place into something it's not. We watched the flames crackle, the sound mingling with the low hum of guests chatting. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the lavender fields swayed in the night breeze, the scent drifting toward us like a promise. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked down to the dock alone. The moon was full, its reflection rippling across the dark water. I thought about the fight I'd just been through, and how different the outcome could have been if I'd been alone. The truth was, I'd been ready to stand my ground from the start. But Caleb had reminded me that there's a difference between standing your ground and winning the fight. And we had won. When I returned to the house, Caleb was in the kitchen, reviewing more documents. He looked up and smiled. You know, he said, We could take this resort to the next level without touching what makes it special. Careful expansions, things that enhance the experience, not erase it. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. Maybe, but only if we do it my way. Your way, he agreed. That night, I slept with the windows open, the sound of the lake lapping against the shore, no phone calls, no pressure, no strangers parked just beyond the property line. Just peace. The lake was still the next morning, the kind of stillness that made the world look like it was holding its breath. From my kitchen window, the water reflected the early light so perfectly it could have been glass. It struck me then how much had changed in just a few weeks, not the property, not the lavender fields, or the dock, but me. When Ethan first called, I'd felt the old pull of guilt, the reflex to give, to sacrifice, to keep the peace no matter the cost. For years, I'd believed that was what a good mother did. But standing in this kitchen now, coffee warming my hands, I knew better. A good mother doesn't give away the ground she built for her children to stand on. She teaches them how to build their own. Ethan hadn't come back yet, but that was all right. I'd seen a crack in him the day Vanessa's mask slipped a moment, where he realized he'd been standing on shaky ground of his own making. Whether he chose to rebuild was up to him. My door would be open, but not my deeds, not my title, not my legacy. Caleb came into the kitchen, hair still mussed from sleep, and poured himself a mug. "Quiet morning," he said. "Perfect morning," I replied. We sat together in that comfortable silence, the kind that only exists when the worst is behind you. He didn't need to say anything else, because we both knew what we'd done. We'd protected this place, not just as a business, but as a home, a history, a promise kept. Later, I walked the property alone. The lavender brushed against my palms. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in months, I wasn't walking with my shoulders tense. No one was circling the property line. No one was waiting to ambush me at a cafe. This land was mine. It would stay mine until I decided otherwise. When I reached the dock, I sat down at the edge, letting my feet dangle just above the water. The boards creaked the way they always had, and I imagined Dean sitting beside me like he used to, his hand covering mine. He'd been gone for so long, but I could almost hear his voice. "You did good, Maggie." I smiled, not because I needed his approval, but because I knew he was right. I had done good. Not just in saving the resort, but in proving to them, to Caleb, to myself that I wasn't someone to be underestimated, that I could still stand my ground when the ground was worth standing on. I thought about the viewers who might be hearing this story now. Maybe you've been in your own fight, maybe not over land or money, but something you love that someone else thought they had the right to take. Maybe you felt the pressure to hand it over for the greater good or a better future that didn't really include you. If you take nothing else from this, take this: you don't owe your dreams, your work, or your peace to anyone who wouldn't protect them the way you would. The lavender swayed behind me, the lake stretched out in front, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I could breathe. Not because the fight was over, but because I had fought it on my terms and won. Sometimes, family is the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one that shows up for you when it matters most. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's both. If you've ever had to fight for something that mattered to you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. What did you stand up for, and was it worth it in the end? And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about betrayal, resilience, and the kind of victories you never forget.